Iain, you call yourself not a typical idealist, and yet you believe that consciousness is an ontological primitive, meaning that it's a brute fact at the fundamental level of reality. So why are you different than a typical idealist?
Well, a typical idealist makes a distinction between the idea of what it is that we think of as somehow out there that we experience and the realm inside. So an idealist subsumes the whole of experience under what goes on within the mind. So the risk here is that you project an idea that the whole of the world that we share is somehow brought into being only through the consciousness that is observing it. I don't believe that. I believe that there is a world that is not dependent on my consciousness, and there is a consciousness in here that is not somehow made by the world. But the consciousness that I experience comes out of the coming together of whatever it is I bring, and manifestly we do. We're not sort of naive like photographic plates registering experience. We bring something to our experience, each of us differently, and the world that is experienced. And so it is this encounter, which is always new, that creates my experience of the world. And it's neither idealist nor naively realist. In other words, it's not just that there's stuff and there's the mind. It's that the two need to come together to bring about what we experience as our experience, our reality.
And what's the sequence of argument that you would make for that case? I mean, that's the conclusion, but what's the flow of the argument?
Well, I think it's very obvious that it's naive to suppose that there just is a world out there. By now, even physics can demonstrate that observation changes what it is that we observe. Now, in that case, and it's also even perhaps more true in social and psychological experience, that what we see is different depending on who we are, what our previous experience was, what our expectations are, and so on. So the world that we experience, which is the only world that we can ever know, is not just a given. On the other hand, I'm very opposed to the postmodern idea that somehow it's something we make up. These are the two, I think, crudely polar opposites that I'm trying to stop my position being interpreted as falling into. The trouble with saying I'm an idealist is people will think, oh, I see, it's like we don't really have any contact with reality. We just, as some people say, we read off, as it were, data from a dashboard inside our head. I do not believe this at all. I believe that what we experience is the real deal, and it's not exactly the same as what you experience, but it's not so wildly different that when we get together and talk, we don't share a common world.
So we're trying to understand that metaphysically. In other words, what is the metaphysical structure of reality and of our brain consciousness that can enable that to be true?
Yes. Are you asking me about
what does it take in structure, however structure you want to see it, whether it's a metaphysical structure, consciousness structure, brain structure, what does it take to bring that about?
Well, it takes having something that we don't really know what it is, and we used to think must be part of something special that the cerebrum does.
Yes.
And roughly speaking, what you've got here is an idea that as the brain becomes more and more complex, and there are billions, literally 100 billion neurons, and these all have interconnections, then it's somehow, it seems to me a bit like a magic trick, abracadabra, out of all the complexity arises consciousness. I don't believe this for a whole range of reasons. For example, number one is that 80% of the neurons in your brain are in the cerebellum, the ancient part of the brain at the back. It's only 20% that are in the cerebrum. So the cerebellum is massively complex. And you might say, well, the neurons there are not particularly complex, but they are. I mean, peculiar to the cerebellum is Purkinje cells, which are some of those ramified cells that make more interconnections than other neurons. So that clearly isn't the case. And we also know that in individuals where the cerebrum is almost entirely absent, that they nonetheless are able to have consciousness. So we haven't cracked that one, but the answer is certainly not complexity of neuronal mass. But we also see what I would say is conscious behavior, intelligent behavior in very simple organisms. And we see it in animals, of course, we see it in plants, we see it in single cells. So to quote James Shapiro, microbiologist, evolutionary biologist at Chicago, the single cell has intelligence. Now,
but intelligence is not consciousness.
well, intelligence, this is a difficult thing because we've blurred our idea of what intelligence is in order to accommodate AI. And intelligence means understanding. And I don't believe that there is, that's another topic, but that a machine can understand. Interlegery, the root of intelligence, means to read among or to select among things. So it needs to be present in a context, to understand that context and all the ramifications in it. And that seems to be what a single cell is able to do. So, for example, it can defend itself in very short order against an attack for which it is neither programmed by heredity nor primed by experience. So it's something that it has never encountered, but it produces a new intelligent reaction. Now that newness, that word new, is important because I believe the cosmos is conscious and creative, and it's out of this process of conscious creativity that whatever it is we call intelligence arises.
And so therefore you would draw a closer relationship between that kind of intelligence and consciousness.
I would.
So that's interesting, and that would bring consciousness way down on the phylogenetic scale.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I believe that essentially, although the nature of the consciousness changes, no living thing is entirely devoid of consciousness. Even Darwin himself realized that trees were conscious. He called the root mass of a tree its brain.
But that could be a metaphor.
Could be a metaphor, but he also saw that it was acting intelligently and taking into account a whole range of factors that, are not simply routine reflex responses.
The fact that Darwin obviously had brilliance with evolution doesn't make him right about other kinds of things at that time. And so how does the fact that this biological analysis of the cerebellum with 80% of the cells in the cerebrum not necessary, what do you conclude from that set of data?
I conclude that we're on the wrong track, that our attempt to show that the consciousness emerges from the brain is wrong. What I think is that there needs to be something that generates the experience of each organism, including obviously each human organism, and that for most of us, the brain acts as a transmitter, but more as a permitter of consciousness. So in a way, it shapes and molds and limits consciousness to what it is that I perceive. So consciousness, there is global consciousness, and I believe that is the stuff of the cosmos. And I believe that everything that exists in that consciousness and has something of that consciousness about it, even the inanimate world. So I don't make a big distinction between inanimacy and life. Obviously, there is a very important distinction, and it's probably wrong to say I don't make a big distinction, but I don't make an absolute distinction. So I don't think the question is so much sort of where did consciousness fit in, because I believe it is the given stuff of the cosmos, but where does life fit in? Because life is a very paradoxical thing, if you think about it. If persisting is what you want and to win the battle to remain, then as Iain Whitehead pointed out, the secret is never to have been alive. Mountains last for billions of years, we last for only 70 on average. And interestingly, life has evolved more in the direction of shorter lives. So at the base of the ocean in places, there are single examples of actinobacteria that are 1 million years old. And we have done rather badly in this evolutionary battle. So what is the business of the existence of life about? And my answer relates to consciousness. So I believe that whatever this consciousness is that originates needs a response. I come back to the idea that there is an encounter. And I hesitate to bring the divine into this at this stage, but I believe that that ground of being is divine, and that in an image that is virtually identical to one used by Whitehead, of whom I'm a great admirer, but my idea came before I discovered that Whitehead thought these things, that God and the cosmos are evolving together. God is in a process of discovery of the powers and what it is that is enfolded and can be unfolded into the explicit universe. And so I think all of life is a process of this unfolding in the interest of making a deeper and better connection with that ground of being. So, for example, a mole may very well have purposes, it may very well perceive values, it may respond in certain ways that we recognize, but mankind takes this to many orders of magnitude further.